The first light of dawn spilled across the plains, painting the cracked soil and dry grass in muted gold. Wind whispered through the brittle fences of a ranch that had once been full of life. The boards were grey now, weathered like the man who leaned against them. Ethan Cole pulled his coat tighter against the cold, his eyes fixed on the horizon, as if expecting something that never came. He had been up since before sunrise, counting the few cattle that remained, feeding them from the last sack of grain. His movements were slow, deliberate, burdened by a weariness that went deeper than fatigue. The ranch, his father's legacy, was falling apart piece by piece. Fences needed mending, the roof leaked, and the well had started to run dry. Yet Ethan stayed, because leaving would mean accepting that everything he had worked for, everything his family once stood for, was gone. A faint sound carried on the wind, sharp and sudden, like metal scraping against stone. Ethan's brow furrowed. So it came again, a desperate, strangled cry that didn't belong to any machine or bird. He straightened, listening. The sound had an edge of pain and underneath it fear. He set down the feed bucket, wiped his hands on his jeans and started toward the sound. The wind bit at his face as he crossed the uneven field, the dry grass brushing against his boots. Each step filled him with unease. Out here, miles from the next ranch, strange noises usually meant trouble, an injured animal, a predator, or worse. Another reminder of how fragile life had become in this dying land. As he reached the fence line, Ethan stopped. Just beyond the ridge, tangled in barbed wire, was a wild horse. The creature's coat was a deep, burnished chestnut, its flanks streaked with blood where the wire had cut into flesh. Muscles rippled under torn hide as it thrashed, eyes wide with terror. The wire tightened with every movement, slicing deeper. Ethan's breath caught. He had seen wild horses before, mustangs that roamed free across the valley, but never one in such a state. This animal was a masterpiece of nature, powerful and untamed, reduced to panic and pain. He took a cautious step forward. The horse snorted, jerking violently. The barbs tore more skin. Ethan froze. One wrong move, and the beast might kill itself trying to get away. He scanned the area, searching for a way to help without spooking it further. His voice came low and steady, the same tone he used when calming frightened cattle. "Easy now. No one's going to hurt you." The horse's ears twitched at the sound, though its body remained tense, trembling from exhaustion. Ethan shrugged off his coat and moved closer, each step measured. The air felt electric, as if the world itself was holding its breath. When he was near enough to smell the animal's sweat and blood, he gently draped the coat over its eyes. The horse shuddered but did not kick. Darkness calmed it, if only a little. Ethan pulled a pair of old pliers from his belt and began working on the wire. The barbs bit into his hands, reopening old calluses, but he kept cutting. The sound of metal snapping echoed in the empty field. Between each cut he whispered softly, nonsense words mostly, tones of comfort more than meaning. The horse's breathing slowed. Its legs trembled, but it no longer fought. When the last strand of wire fell away, the creature stumbled forward, free but unsteady, before collapsing to its knees. Dust rose around them in a pale cloud. Ethan knelt beside it, examining the wounds. The cuts were deep but not fatal if treated soon. He hesitated, looking back toward his house in the distance. He barely had enough feed for his own animals, no medicine and little water. Bringing this horse back would mean risking what little he had left. But leaving it here, broken and bleeding, wasn't something he could live with. Compassion wrestled with reason in his mind, and compassion won. "You'll make it," he murmured. "We both will." He found a length of rope near the fence post, tied it loosely around the horse's neck, and coaxed it to its feet. It resisted at first, muscles locking in fear. But Ethan waited patiently, murmuring until the animal took one step, then another. They moved slowly across the field, man and beast both battered but determined. The sun climbed higher, burning through the morning chill. Sweat soaked Ethan's shirt and dust clung to his face. By the time they reached the ranch, his arms shook from effort. The horse was trembling too, but it followed him willingly now, perhaps sensing his intent. In the small barn, Ethan cleared a stall, laying down straw and filling a bucket with water from the well. He cleaned the wounds with what little antiseptic he had, using torn pieces of an old shirt as bandages. The horse flinched at each touch but didn't strike. When the work was done, Ethan stepped back, studying the animal. Beneath the dirt and dried blood it was magnificent, a creature that belonged to open skies, not fences. He felt an ache in his chest, a memory stirring of days long gone when the ranch had thrived and laughter had filled these empty spaces. He didn't know why, but looking at the horse made him feel something he hadn't in years. Hope. "You need a name," he said softly. The horse lifted its head, meeting his gaze. Its eyes, dark and deep, reflected both defiance and gratitude. "Spirit," Ethan decided. "Yeah, that fits." Outside, thunder rumbled across the plains. A storm was coming, the kind that tore through fences and left the land even more broken. Ethan stepped onto the porch, watching the clouds roll in. Rain would be a blessing if it came gentle, but lately nothing about this land had been gentle. Behind him from the barn came a low, weary whinny. He turned and through the open door saw Spirit watching him, ears flicking at the thunder. "You're safe now," Ethan said, more to himself than to the horse. He sank into the old wooden chair on the porch, the smell of wet dust filling the air as the first drops began to fall. The sound of rain on the tin roof brought memories, his father teaching him to ride, his wife laughing as she chased chickens through the yard. The echoes of those moments seemed to blend with the rhythm of the storm. As lightning lit the horizon, Ethan felt something shift inside him. Maybe saving the horse wasn't about charity. Maybe it was about remembering that not everything broken had to stay that way. He closed his eyes and listened to the rain and the soft sound of the horses breathing in the barn. For the first time in a long while, the ranch didn't feel entirely empty. Far off, beyond the curtain of rain, a faint light flickered, distant riders moving slowly across the valley. Ethan didn't notice them yet, his thoughts lost in the quiet relief of doing what felt right. But the world beyond his fence was stirring, and neither he nor the horse knew that this small act of kindness had set something greater in motion, something that would test the limits of trust, loyalty, and survival. The storm grew heavier, and in its shadow their story was just beginning. The rain had stopped by morning, leaving the air thick with the scent of damp earth and the soft creak of wood drying in the sun. The storm had soaked through the barn roof, but Spirit stood tall despite his wounds, his coat glistening like polished copper under the weak light that filtered through the cracks. Ethan moved quietly between the stalls, his limp barely noticeable as he carried a bucket of water and an armful of hay. He had not slept much. Every few hours he had risen to check on the horse, listening for the steady rhythm of its breathing. Now, watching Spirit lower his head to drink, Ethan felt an odd calm, something close to gratitude, though he wasn't sure for what. Perhaps for the simple fact that the horse had survived the night. Days passed in slow rhythm. Ethan tended to Spirit's wounds, cleaning them with careful hands and wrapping them in strips of linen he tore from his own shirts. Each time the horse flinched but did not pull away. The trust was fragile but growing, like the first green shoots after drought. Ethan spoke little, but when he did, his voice was gentle. He told stories of the ranch's past, of the father who had built it with his bare hands, and the wife who had once filled it with warmth. The words seemed to fill the silence that hung between them. "You'd have liked her," he said once, almost to himself. "She had a way with broken things." Spirit's ears twitched at the sound of his voice, and for a moment Ethan thought the horse understood. Every morning, Spirit grew stronger. He began to move with cautious confidence, testing the limits of the small corral outside the barn. Ethan stood by the fence, arms folded, watching the stallion's muscles ripple beneath his healed skin. The wildness was returning, and Ethan knew it was only a matter of time before Spirit remembered what freedom felt like. He didn't want to think about that day. He had lost too much already to bear another goodbye, but deep down, he knew that keeping a creature like Spirit caged would break him just as surely as the fences had once trapped him. The neighbors came by sometimes, drawn by curiosity more than kindness. Old Man Harris, leaning on his stick, shook his head at the sight of the horse. "You're wasting your time, Cole," he muttered. "A wild thing don't stay grateful. It'll turn on you soon as it's strong enough." Ethan didn't answer. He had learned long ago that most people spoke from fear, not wisdom. Harris left muttering about fools and pride, but Ethan barely heard him. He was too busy brushing Spirit's mane, his rough hands steady, his expression thoughtful. "Maybe he's right," Ethan murmured softly, "but maybe not every wild thing needs taming." At night, when the wind whistled through the cracks, Ethan sat by the lantern, mending harnesses and stitching torn sacks. The horse's shadow moved across the barn wall, restless yet peaceful. Sometimes Ethan caught himself talking aloud, recounting memories he hadn't spoken in years. He told Spirit about the fire, the storm that struck the old house, lightning setting the roof ablaze before he could save his wife and unborn child. He spoke of the silence afterward, how it had stretched over the years like a curse. Spirit would stand still as if listening, eyes dark and steady, and Ethan found that the telling eased something inside him. The words no longer burned. They simply existed like scars. One afternoon, as Ethan repaired the fence by the north field, he heard the thunder of hooves. His heart lurched. He thought Spirit had escaped. But when he turned, he saw the stallion galloping in circles inside the corral, kicking up dust, testing his strength. Ethan couldn't help but smile. "You've got fire in you again," he said under his breath. He leaned on the fence rail, watching until Spirit slowed and approached, nostrils flaring, mane tangled in the wind. For the first time, the horse didn't shy away when Ethan reached out. He let the man's hand rest against his forehead. The warmth of contact sent a jolt through Ethan's chest. He had forgotten what it felt like to be trusted. As the days warmed, Ethan began gentle training, nothing more than walking beside Spirit, leading him with a loose rope, speaking softly to keep him calm. The horse followed, head high, steps careful. Ethan knew the stallion could break free any time he wished, but he didn't. There was understanding now, something unspoken passing between them. Yet for every moment of peace, there was a shadow lurking at the edge of Ethan's thoughts, the constant reminder of how precarious his life had become. The ranch's debts were mounting, the harvest had failed, and the letters from the bank grew colder with each week. He pretended not to see them piling on the kitchen table, but the weight of them pressed against his chest. One evening, while fixing a broken gate, a black truck pulled up the dirt road. The engine's growl echoed across the empty fields. A man stepped out, Calder Royce, owner of half the county and every piece of land that used to belong to men like Ethan. He wore a pressed shirt, polished boots, and the kind of smile that hid knives behind it. "Cole," Royce called out, brushing the dust from his coat. "You've been hard to reach. Thought I'd drop by, see how the old place is holding up." Ethan didn't answer right away. He wiped his hands on his jeans, eyeing the man with quiet distrust. "So you didn't come to talk about the weather," he said finally. Royce chuckled. "Straight to it, huh? I admire that. You know the bank's ready to move on your debt. But I'm willing to make things easy for you. Sell me the ranch, take what little's left, and walk away. I'll even throw in a favor. Heard you've got a wild horse here worth something." Ethan's jaw tightened. He felt the heat rise in his chest. "He's not for sale," he said. Royce's smile didn't waver. "Everything's for sale, Cole. You might want to remember that." He turned to leave, his boots crunching on gravel. "Think it over. Would hate to see the sheriff come knocking." The truck's tires spat dust as it drove away, leaving silence behind. Ethan stood there for a long time, fists clenched, watching the horizon darken. That night he lay awake, listening to the restless shuffle of hooves from the barn. Spirit pawed at the ground, uneasy, as if sensing the tension in the air. Ethan rose, pulled on his coat, and stepped outside. The moonlight turned the field silver, and for a moment everything was still. He walked to the stall and rested his hand on the wooden door. "They'll come for this land," he whispered. "And maybe for you too. But I won't let them take what's left of either of us." Spirit's ears flicked toward him, eyes glinting in the dim light. The next morning, Ethan began strengthening the fences, hammering nails until his palms blistered. Spirit watched him from the corral, head raised, tail swishing. Ethan paused to look back, breathing hard. "We've both been trapped before," he said softly. "But not again." The horse gave a low whinny, almost in answer, and Ethan smiled despite the ache in his chest. The sun dipped low, washing the fields in amber. For the first time in years, Ethan felt the spark of purpose return, faint but alive. Spirit was more than a rescued animal now. He was a reason to fight, a mirror of Ethan's own battered will. As the wind whispered across the plain and dusk deepened, Ethan stood by the fence, watching the stallion move with strength and grace reborn. Somewhere beyond the hills the world was changing, and he could sense that the peace they'd built would not last. Yet for now man and horse stood together beneath the fading light, two survivors waiting for whatever storm would come next. The wind carried a dry chill across the valley that morning, whispering through the brittle grass and rattling the old fence posts like a warning. Ethan woke before sunrise, his hands stiff from the cold and his mind restless with the memory of Royce's visit. The ranch felt smaller somehow, like the land itself had begun to close in around him. He poured himself a cup of black coffee and stood by the window watching Spirit in the corral. The stallion was restless, pacing along the fence line, muscles taut beneath his gleaming chestnut coat. It was as though the horse sensed what Ethan could only feel in his bones, that something dark was moving closer. Ethan spent the morning reinforcing the gates, driving nails until his palms split and bled. He wasn't sure what he was preparing for, but he worked anyway. The rhythm of the hammer against wood was steady, grounding. Spirit snorted, stamping at the ground, his eyes sharp with a kind of awareness that made Ethan pause. He wiped the sweat from his forehead, resting his weight against the fence. "You feel it too, don't you?" he murmured. Spirit's ears flicked forward at his voice, nostrils flaring. The bond between them had deepened beyond understanding. They no longer needed words. By noon clouds gathered over the hills, and the sound of engines cut through the stillness. Two trucks appeared on the dirt road, dark against the pale sky. Ethan's stomach tightened as he watched them approach. He recognized the front vehicle, a black pickup with polished chrome, the same one Royce had driven days before. He stepped off the porch and waited, the weight of years heavy in his shoulders. The trucks rolled to a stop near the barn, dust swirling around the tires. 4 men climbed out, rough and confident, the kind who'd spent their lives taking what wasn't theirs. Royce followed, adjusting his hat, his smile sharp and practiced. "Morning, Cole," Royce called, his tone almost friendly. "Thought I'd stop by, see if you'd changed your mind." Ethan said nothing. He could feel Spirit watching from the corral, the stallion's head held high, muscles coiled like a spring. Royce's eyes flicked toward the horse, and something greedy passed over his face. "He's a beauty, I'll give you that," he said. "Must be worth a fortune to the right buyer." "He's not for sale," Ethan said quietly. His voice carried the weight of finality. Royce sighed, glancing at his men. "You know, I was hoping we could handle this neighborly. But I can't have some washed-up rancher standing in the way of progress. You owe the bank, and I've already bought your debt. So technically, Cole, this land's mine." Ethan's jaw tightened. "You can have the land," he said, "but you don't touch the horse." Royce's smile faded. "We'll see about that." He nodded to his men, who began moving toward the corral. The air seemed to freeze. Spirit reared, letting out a piercing cry that split the silence. Ethan stepped forward, his voice sharp with command. "Get back! You don't know what you're doing." But the men ignored him, ropes in hand. One swung it over the fence, missing as Spirit bolted to the side, hooves churning up dust. Another man tried from the other end, shouting curses. The chaos unfolded fast, too fast. Spirit crashed against the fence, splintering wood. Ethan ran toward them, his heart pounding, but a rough hand caught his arm, throwing him to the ground. He hit hard, dirt filling his mouth. Royce's shadow loomed over him. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be," he said, voice low and venomous. Ethan spat blood, glaring up at him. "You're not taking him," he hissed. A sudden crack split the air. One of the ropes had caught around Spirit's neck. The stallion screamed, rearing high, kicking out with violent strength. A man stumbled back, clutching his shoulder, and another shouted for help. Ethan pushed himself to his feet, lunging for the fence. He grabbed the pliers hanging from a post and cut through the rope with one swift motion. The freed end snapped back, whipping across his cheek. Spirit broke loose, slamming through the corral gate in an explosion of power and fury. The men dove aside as the stallion thundered past them, his hooves striking sparks against the rocks. Royce cursed and shouted orders, but Spirit was gone, charging toward the open fields beyond the ridge. Ethan's lungs burned as he ran after him. He heard Royce yelling, the sound of trucks revving up again, engines roaring as they gave chase. The ground trembled beneath the weight of the pursuit. Dust rose around Ethan's boots as he stumbled through the tall grass, his legs screaming in protest. By the time he reached the hilltop, the trucks were closing in on the horse. They tried to box him in, driving in arcs, herding him toward the canyon's edge. "No, no, no!" Ethan shouted, his voice raw. He could see Spirit skidding on loose gravel, panicked eyes flashing in the sunlight. One of the men threw another rope. It tangled around the stallion's legs, dragging him to the ground. The sound of the fall tore through Ethan's chest like a blade. Without thinking, he sprinted downhill, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He reached the canyon floor as the men were trying to pull Spirit toward a waiting trailer. "Get away from him!" Ethan bellowed, rage cutting through exhaustion. One man turned, laughing. "Old fool, you'll get yourself killed." Ethan didn't answer. He grabbed a rusted shovel leaning against the truck and swung it with every ounce of strength left in him. The blow landed hard, sending the man sprawling. Another lunged at him, but Ethan ducked, ramming his shoulder into the man's ribs. For a brief moment, chaos reigned. Shouts, dust, and the metallic smell of blood filling the air. Spirit struggled to his feet, trembling but alive. The ropes hung loose now, frayed and useless. Ethan dropped the shovel and reached out, his voice trembling. "Come on, boy. You can do this." Spirit met his gaze, and in that instant, something passed between them, pure trust, unspoken but absolute. The stallion surged forward, slamming his hooves into the ground, scattering the men like leaves in a storm. Ethan scrambled onto the back of the truck, cutting the last rope from Spirit's neck. The horse reared once, shaking free, and together they broke through the chaos. The rain began again, sudden and violent, drenching the earth. Ethan grabbed hold of Spirit's mane and climbed onto his back, ignoring the pain that flared through his body. They tore across the canyon floor, mud flying beneath their hooves. Behind them, engines roared, headlights cutting through the storm. Ethan leaned low, whispering into the wind, "Faster, Spirit. Don't look back." The stallion obeyed, his stride long and powerful. The world blurred around them, the thunder above, the roar of water below, and the echo of pursuit fading behind. When they reached the ridge, Spirit slowed, breath heaving, steam rising from his coat. Ethan slid from his back, knees buckling from exhaustion. They stood side by side at the cliff's edge. The valley spread below like a vast ocean of silver and shadow. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the cuts across Spirit's flank and the streaks of blood on Ethan's hands. He reached out, resting his palm against the stallion's neck. "You're free now," he whispered, voice breaking. Spirit lowered his head, nuzzling his shoulder in quiet understanding. Behind them the storm swallowed the sound of engines. The men were gone, for now. Ethan sank to his knees, trembling from the weight of it all. The rain washed the blood and dirt from his face, leaving only the raw ache of relief. Spirit stood over him, head bowed, guarding him against the storm. In the wild silence that followed, Ethan knew this battle was only the beginning. Freedom had come at a cost, and somewhere beyond the thunder, he could almost hear fate whispering that the fight for it was far from over. The dawn after the storm broke quietly, washing the valley in a pale, uncertain light. Mist rose from the soaked earth, curling around the fence posts and drifting through the hollow where Spirit grazed. The stallion's coat gleamed beneath the thin sunlight, his movements calm but alert, every twitch of his ear attuned to the slightest sound. Ethan watched from the porch, his arm bound in a makeshift sling, his body worn and aching. The night's chaos had left him with bruises, cuts, and a weight that pressed deep behind his ribs. He'd won a battle, but the war still loomed. The ranch was battered. Broken fences, torn gates, and muddy hoofprints cut through the soil like scars. But Spirit was alive, and that was all that mattered. Ethan limped across the yard, every step measured. When he reached the corral, Spirit lifted his head, eyes dark and bright as amber. "You did good, boy," Ethan said softly. "Better than I deserved," the stallion snorted, brushing his muzzle against Ethan's shoulder, and for a moment the man felt a quiet strength pass between them, an unspoken promise that neither would bow easily to what came next. The sound of an engine shattered the calm. Ethan's head snapped up, heart pounding. A lone vehicle rolled down the dirt road, an old sheriff's truck, the paint sun-faded and dust-streaked. Sheriff Lane stepped out, his face lined from years under the desert sun. He took one long look at the wrecked corral and sighed. "Heard there was trouble out here," he said. "You want to tell me what happened?" Ethan hesitated. His eyes drifted toward the hills where Royce's men had vanished hours before. "Royce tried to take the horse," he said finally. "Brought his crew. Didn't end well for them." The sheriff rubbed his jaw, expression unreadable. "I figured it'd come to that," he muttered. "Man like Royce doesn't quit. He's got half the county on his payroll and the rest too scared to stand against him." "I'm not scared," Ethan said, voice low but firm. "I know," Lane replied. "That's what worries me." He glanced toward Spirit. "You can't keep him safe forever, not like this. Royce'll be back, next time with papers and deputies instead of hired thugs." Ethan looked away, jaw tightening. "He can take the land if he wants. But he doesn't get the horse." The sheriff studied him for a long moment, then nodded once. "I'll do what I can, but I can't protect you from everything. You need to think about what comes next." As the truck disappeared down the road, Ethan stood in the silence that followed, the sheriff's words echoing in his head. What came next? He'd built his life around this land. Every fence post, every trail, every morning spent with Spirit had become a part of him. To walk away now would mean losing more than just a ranch. It would mean losing the last piece of himself that still felt whole. By afternoon the sky had cleared completely, and Ethan saddled Spirit. The stallion moved with smooth, deliberate power beneath him, ears flicking as if he too sensed the uncertainty ahead. Ethan guided him toward the ridge that overlooked the valley. From up there the world looked vast and endless, the golden plains stretching toward the horizon, the jagged peaks of the canyon rising like sentinels in the distance. For the first time in years, Ethan felt small against the enormity of it. He remembered the promise he'd made to his father long ago, to keep the ranch alive, to protect the land their family had bled for. But his father hadn't known men like Royce would one day twist the law into a weapon. The thought hollowed him out, but beneath the despair burned something harder, resolve. He wasn't done fighting. That evening, as the sun sank low, a figure appeared at the edge of the property. Ethan's hand went instinctively to the revolver on his hip, but as the rider drew closer, he recognized her, Clara, the vet from town. Her horse was slick with sweat, her expression tight. She dismounted quickly, eyes scanning the damage around the ranch. "I heard what happened," she said. "They said Royce was involved." "He was," Ethan replied. "Brought 4 men. Spirit sent them running." Clara's eyes softened. She reached up, letting Spirit sniff her hand. "He's lucky to have you," she said. Ethan shook his head. Other way around, she smiled faintly, but her expression soon turned serious. Ethan Royce filed a claim with the county this morning. He's saying you assaulted his men and destroyed property he legally owns. Ethan froze. He's lying. I know, Clara said, but it doesn't matter. The law's on his side. He's got influence, money, signatures, leverage. They'll come for you maybe tomorrow. The weight of it hit him like a blow. For a moment the world blurred at the edges. Then I'll be gone by morning, he said finally. Clara looked stricken. You can't just disappear. You'd be giving him exactly what he wants. What he wants is the horse, Ethan said. He doesn't care about me. She stepped closer, her voice urgent. Then make him care. Make him pay for every inch of this land he's stolen from people like you. There are others who'd stand with you if you just asked. Ethan met her eyes, the fire in them reflecting his own buried anger. Maybe, he said softly, but I've never been much good at asking. They stood in silence as dusk settled over the ranch. Crickets began to sing, and the air grew heavy with the scent of wet earth. Clara finally turned toward her horse. Whatever you do, be careful, she said. Royce won't stop until he's broken you or worse. Ethan watched her ride off, her silhouette fading into the fading light. Spirit nickered quietly beside him, the sound grounding him again. He turned back toward the barn, the decision already forming in his mind. He'd leave before sunrise, take Spirit north through the canyon trails where Royce's trucks couldn't follow. From there, maybe cross the river and find new land, a place where no one knew his name. It wasn't surrender. It was survival. As the night deepened, Ethan packed what little he needed, a rifle, a few supplies, and the worn leather journal his father had left behind. The air was still, the stars sharp and cold above. Spirit stood ready, saddled and calm, his breath misting in the chill. Ethan placed a hand on the stallion's neck, feeling the steady thrum of life beneath his skin. We're not running, he said quietly. We're starting over. But as he swung into the saddle, a sound broke through the darkness, the distant rumble of engines again, growing louder by the second. Ethan's pulse spiked. Headlights flashed at the far end of the road, sweeping over the ranch like searchlights. Royce wasn't waiting for the law. He was coming to finish what he'd started. Spirit pawed the ground, restless and ready. Ethan's jaw set. The storm wasn't over. Not yet. He turned the stallion toward the open fields, the night air biting against his face. Behind them, the engines drew closer, their roar echoing across the valley. Ahead lay only darkness, wild and unclaimed. Ethan whispered into Spirit's ear, "Ride." The stallion surged forward, hooves pounding against the wet earth, the rhythm steady and defiant. The lights behind them blurred into streaks of gold and red, swallowed by the night. And as they vanished into the horizon, Ethan felt something fierce ignite inside him, a promise that no man, no storm, no chain of law could ever take from him again. Freedom. Hard won, fragile, but his. For now.